Hi, my name is Amir Zmora, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of SDWAN. My presentation today is going to be about SD-WAN open source state of the union. Basically, I'm going to start talking about the SD-WAN market and some things and trends that we see there. And from there, I'll talk a little bit about open source in general and FlexiWAN open source for SD-WAN. Let's get going. So first thing we can see, and I think clear to everybody, is that the SD-WAN market is a very crowded market. This is both from vendor perspective and also service provider perspective. We see something between 60 to 70 SD-WAN vendors, or those who claim to be vendors of SD-WAN. And we see that almost every service provider in the world is offering SD-WAN today or looking to offer SD-WAN. And we also see that many of the service providers are going for a multi-vendor approach, meaning they're launching multiple SD-WAN solutions or vendors in order to try and answer the market requirements. And maybe we'll touch that a little bit later on when I talk about the market. So when we look at the SD-WAN solutions, actually, I call them cookie cutter solutions. Now, it's not that I'm trying to say that the solutions are the same. They're not. There are differences, clearly differences between the various vendors and the solutions that they provide. But what I am saying is that they try to take the similar concepts of networking from the past and apply them on SD-WAN and the reality of today. Meaning, they provide you a closed solution. They try to bundle as much as possible software together with hardware. And even if they do allow you to purchase a software-only solution, they try to lock you in for a long time, a long period of a contract, and provide a locked-in solution, lock you to a single vendor. And the way for them to do it is actually to bundle many technologies and capabilities into one big software stack. And we can see here things like WAN optimization and DPI and security and monitoring and other things. Now, nobody said that you need to take all of these elements from the SD-WAN vendor that is providing the SD-WAN solution. Why can't you decide which vendor you're taking for DPI or for security or other things? But what they actually do is put a big lock on this and kind of tell you take it or leave it. They don't allow you to really pick and choose the elements of the solution. Actually, you can also relate it to other things that were discussed in this conference with regards to combining security and zero trust and all of that, and the SASE approach. These are, I think, extreme cases of different types of solutions, and everybody can, some prefer this option and some prefer the other option. Now, when we look at the enterprise requirements, they are exactly the opposite of it, because the enterprise requirements can be anywhere between centrally managed IPsec tunnels. These are actually how you connect between the various sites in your network, how do you connect them to the cloud services, manage everything from one central location, and all the other elements that you have on top of that for networking. That's the kind of foundation. All the way to the full-featured SD-WAN solutions or the bolted SD-WAN solutions that we saw on the previous slide. The reality is always somewhere between these two extreme cases, but never at the same place. It's never a one size fits all. But when you look at what the SD-WAN vendors do, they try to push you to the left-hand side, to the full-featured solution. This is how they create the vendor lock effect. And that's exactly what you want to be careful of. Now, to make things even worse for service providers, SD-WAN, similar to messaging and voice over IP, is over the top. So this means that an enterprise can go and buy connectivity from any telco they choose, and then go ahead and buy SD-WAN directly from the vendor, or maybe take a solution from an SI that will help them with integration. But they don't necessarily need to take it from the service provider. And that's why for the service providers, the need to actually be able to differentiate and bring their own solution, not by just reselling, is critical. So the threat for the service providers and the MSPs is actually to just become pipes or resellers of existing solutions. And that's why, what I mentioned before, what we see is that service providers are launching multiple vendors because they say, well, you know, if I can't answer the requirements of this enterprise with solution from vendor A, maybe I'll bring solution from vendor B, and that will answer his requirements. So then you ask him, okay, so now let's say you've launched 3 vendors. And now you have a customer, an enterprise customer that comes to you, and you need to select which option are you going to give them. How do you select? So of course they say, well, I look which of the solutions is most answering mostly the requirements of that enterprise, and that's what I will give him. But what happens if the requirements along the time change, which always happens, then you're going to switch the vendor? Of course not. So they want to be able to have much more control and ability to actually bring inside the solution various things that they bring in. Now, this is not just VNFs. VNFs, typically everybody can allow to run VNFs. You have orchestration vendors that can allow you to manage, to launch, configure, software upgrade, and so forth for various VNFs and build, like use the UCPE model. But this is not enough, because these are various elements that you take from the vendors. Each one of them is a complete solution that requires, of course, the operating system in the VM. It's not so efficient, and it doesn't give you enough flexibility that the service provider actually wants, that will also match the cost that they want. So this is actually where FlexiWAN open source comes to play. And before I dive into FlexiWAN, I want to talk a little bit about open source in general and the different, let's call them, generations of open source that we can see. So the first, or the evolution of open source in generation number 1 was actually revolution. You had people sitting in the garage and saying, well, you know, we're going to solve this problem. So they work off hours, weekends, whatever, and build something and throw it out to the market, and people picked it up and started adding capabilities to it. So there wasn't really a business model behind it or a company that organized and orchestrated all of this. It was really a community, and that was the beauty of it. And that's the first generation of open source. The second generation of open source is already a commercial type, where you have a company that developed or maybe took an open source solution and provided a commercial license for this open source with support, maybe a dedicated release of that open source, which is a hardened one, like, for example, Red Hat. You have various databases that are offering this option. And a lot of these things are actually elements, technology elements that you can take. And if you take all of these together, you can actually build a solution or throw them into your solution. Other cases that we see here are very big companies that have a product or a service and they make money from that. And then let's say they need, we can give the example of a media engine, okay? They need a media engine like WebRTC from Google, so okay, they build that or they buy a company for that, they release it as open source. This is not the source of their revenue. This is just an element in their system. That's typical for very big companies. And then we have the third generation of open source. And the third generation of open source is actually a company behind the solution. This company is typically the one who is building the vast majority of the code of the product. The community behind is helping with documentation, with testing, finding bugs, reporting bugs, fixing some bugs, but not the core development of the product. And then the business model of this company is SaaS. This is a solution that is built for the cloud, and the company is offering this solution either as open source that you can take it and use it, or a SaaS model to use it with support and hosting and so forth. This is actually what FlexiWAN does, and this is what I'm going to touch in the next few slides. Before that, I'll just say that it's not that I made this up. I took this from an article by Mike Volpe, who is a venture partner at Index and was also chief strategy officer for Cisco. Very interesting article on TechCrunch that I highly recommend reading. And this is actually the link to take a look at it. And also, it's also, by the way, on our website. If you look at the open source section on our website, you'll find the link to this interesting article. So from here, let's talk about FlexiWAN. So our mission is to disrupt and democratize the SD-WAN market. And we do this with what we call the 3 world firsts of FlexiWAN. So we are the first and only open source of SD-WAN. we are the first and only application store for networking and SD-WAN, and that's something I'm going to cover in the next slides. And we're the first and only SaaS business model SD-WAN, and that's going to be covered as well in a few slides. And that's related to what I said just before about the third generation of open source. So what exactly do we do? FlexiWAN slices SD-WAN to horizontal layers. You have the infrastructure, the networking infrastructure. These are those IPsec tunnels I mentioned before that are centrally managed, connecting between the sites, connecting the sites to the cloud, networking protocol, zero-touch provisioning. This infrastructure is a very, very big layer. This is something we worked on for like 2 years, and we continue to work on, and we will continue to work on this for years and years to come. There are always things you want to add there, but this is just the infrastructure. On top of that, we have what we call the application framework, or the networking application framework. This is what allows you, through an SDK, to dynamically load third-party applications, or our applications, or your applications, that run in the data flow of the edge device in Flexi Edge. Okay, so it runs in the router's data flow or in the management. These are not VNFs, actually software library dynamically load inside the process of the edge device. Okay, so you can even run on a bare metal option and still have these applications. And this is what allows you to move dynamically along this line of enterprise requirements I mentioned before. Suddenly you can serve multiple requirements of various types and segments in the market with one single solution by just putting various applications on top. And this is why we call ourselves Android for routers. And this is actually where I always show this. Some of you are probably familiar with it. Okay, this is a feature phone. And when I purchased this phone, I had zero control of what features are inside this phone. The vendor of the phone decided this for me. And we're saying that networking is still stuck in the days of the feature phone, because today when you go and buy an SD-WAN solution, the vendor decides what are the features inside. You do not have control of the features inside. So what we do with this application store and framework is take networking through a similar evolution that mobile phones went through to this concept of the smartphones. So our solution has nothing to do with Android, of course, but just the concept of applications, and that's why we call it Android for routers. So talking about the business model, I mentioned before that we have a SaaS business model, but of course, if you want, you can go ahead and take the open source, and I'll give you and show you a link afterwards of where you can find the open source. Inside the open source, we provide everything. You have all the code of Flexi Edge, which is our edge device, and Flexi Manage, which is our management system. Everything is out there in the open source. You can go ahead and take a look at the code. There are only two things that we did not include in the open source. One, our billing engine. That's, of course, part of our offering for SaaS, so all the way how to put credit cards and all of that and collect the billing. That's not part of the open source. And the second thing is just the layer of the UI. It's just a very, very thin layer of the user interface, because our management system is still in the open source. We have REST APIs there. These REST APIs are documented in our documentation. If you go to the website of FlexiWAN, in resources, you'll see documentation, and there you'll see a section of the REST APIs. You can go ahead and build your own UI, regardless if you're using the open source or you're using the hosted system. In one of the elements I'll just show in the next slide, you can also go ahead and build your own UI. So let's look now at the three various commercial options that we offer. So there are three options for hosting the management. The first two of those are SaaS. First one is the shared environment. Here, what you can do is go to our website. Actually, I'll show the link in just a second. Click on open a free account, and that will open you an account on our shared environment when you can kick the tires, 3 Flexi Edge instances that you can run for free, even in production, okay? And if you like and you want to put more devices, you just put in a credit card and continue growing and growing as needed. no long-term commitment. You only pay for what you use month by month. The second option is the dedicated environment. In the dedicated environment, what we do is we spin up a complete set of servers, 2 clusters of databases and more servers that we put there on AWS, isolated, especially for you, white label, put your logo, map your domain, control the software upgrade cycle. You have a lot of control of the system, but you don't have the hassle of taking care of all of those servers and all the complexity and hosting the management. And also here, surprise, surprise, pricing on the website, no long-term commitment, month by month, you can stop at any time. The third option is self-hosting. In this case, what we do is we give you a complete package ready to deploy that you will put on your servers. The difference here is that this requires us to help you in the installation, typically even to install it from remote for you, to train you and to work with you in order for you to get this system going and being able to maintain it by yourself. Of course, we will give you support along the way as well. And that's why only in this case, we do require a much bigger commitment, but again, not something that is crazy. We typically recommend starting with a dedicated environment, and only then, if you really start to grow your deployment, move to the self-hosting instead of investing time and money in the self-hosting before you even know that you're actually going to use it. So let's look at some links here. You can see where to get the open source from. If you go to our website, in the menu, you will see open source. And over there, you can join the community if you want to get some notifications from us and updates about things that are being released and other stuff. And you will also see a button there to get the open source. Click on that, and you can get the link to the Git and take a look at the code. The second link that we see here is to the pricing page, but there at the very, very top of the pricing page, you'll see a big button, open a free account. Click on that, fill in your details. You'll go to our management system, create the account, install a few devices, and play around with the system. That's it. Thank you very much for listening. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.